I'm Dan Rogers. Today we are here with Tim Reid, who's running for Amarillo City Council Place 1. Tim, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Dan.
Well, let's tell the voters who you are and why you want to be a city councilman.
All righty, that's a fair start. Right now, I'm the executive director over the Texas Panhandle War Memorial. I've been there for 2.5 years, and trying to expand the scope of what the War Memorial is for the city. So right now we have 5 veteran services that are housed inside the memorial. That's something new over this last year. And I'm working towards this summer actually putting a leadership academy together for high school students so that we can work on their soft skills in leadership. And it's going to be based on the Medal of Honor character development program that the Medal of Honor Society has developed. They've got a whole curriculum that it goes through and everything. So we're hoping that when we kick that off this summer, that we'll have a good response from our students here that hope that they're going to go into some type of leadership position in school, like National Honor Society, student government, those type of things. So, and prior to that, I was at Ascension Academy as the athletic director and a teacher. I taught 6th grade geography and 2 high school classes, crime scene forensics and geopolitics. And prior to that, most of my adult life, I spent 32 years in law enforcement. I started out 1 year as a local police officer in Little Falls, New Jersey, and then 3.5 years with the New Jersey State Police. And then I got on with the FBI. They transferred me to Dallas, and Dallas transferred me to Amarillo in 1986 for an 18-month assignment that turned into 19 years. And I promoted out of here in 2005 and worked between West Virginia and Washington, D.C. on 2 IT projects plus 8 diplomatic tours. And when I retired in 2013, that's when I moved back to Amarillo.
So those 19 years wore on you.
They did. Amarillo quickly became home. I'm not only being with the FBI and working with the local law enforcement throughout the Panhandle, but it actually became a place where I could ground myself, raised a family, and it became home.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Well, I think it happens to a lot of people.
I think so. I always tell people, give it about 1.5 years, and you won't want to go anyplace else. When I retired, I knew I was coming back here. It took a few months to sell my home, but I got back here as quickly as I could and set up shop and have been happy ever since.
Well, that's great. So what makes you want to be on the city council?
You look at years of service, not only professionally, but in my personal life. And that's all I've known is doing, whether it has been in the law enforcement field, but also the nonprofits that I've been involved in, things here in town. And service becomes a kind of a natural tendency for me. And I don't know a life without it. And if you're going to be part of the community, you really need to give back to the community that's your home. And since Amarillo is my home, I feel I have a few more things to give to the community. And one of them, when this seat opened up, when Josh decided he wasn't going to run for re-election, I took a lot of time contemplating it. As you and I both know, a couple of years ago, I ran for Senate, and so my interest has been in government and trying to make it more effective and efficient, but also kind of be a voice of reason for things. I think my background with the FBI and the things that I was involved in gives me some good tools to use when talking with our citizens, looking at programs, and really getting the facts behind them before we take an action on something. Just the other day I was talking to somebody that I would walk into trial the morning that we would start trials, and I'd always look at the prosecutor and I'd say, are we sure we've got this right up to going into that courtroom? Because it always bothered me that because I knew what I was doing was going to affect somebody's livelihood. It was also going to affect their families and their friends. And so I made every effort I could to make sure I had all of the facts and the whole story before I did something. And so I think that those are great characteristics to bring onto the council, especially right now. We've got a lot of community bickering, and I think we've got to get some people on the council that can be that voice of reason, because not everybody does everything wrong, and very few people do everything right. And so we are citizens of Amarillo, and I think everybody wants the best for Amarillo. And how we achieve that, there are different routes to do it, and we got to be open to listening to those different voices. And then, as a council member, you have to make those decisions. And so I think that my background has prepared me well for that.
Yeah, at the end of the day, we're electing somebody who we think has good judgment. Right. We don't expect them to have the answers. But people want somebody that can take in all the information, be thorough in their analysis, and make a good decision. Right?
Yep. And I think that probably sums it up the best. We are, as we go out in campaigning, we're out there applying for this job.
Yeah.
And the citizens have to feel that there's a level of trust in that person. They may not agree with them 100% of the time or 50% of the time, but they have that level of trust that at least they're going to listen, and they're going to make the decisions that they see are the best for the community.
So what do you think are the three big issues facing the council right now that you're hearing out there talking to the voters?
Well, when you look at city government, for the average person, there are only a few things that really matter to them. Right. And they happen to be the big things. With my diplomatic tours that I had in the countries I was in, I saw what happens to a country when they don't have a wastewater removal system. They don't have running water. They don't have that safety and security that a city or a state should provide for them. And so, you look at that, those are the same issues on the local level that we have. The average person wants to know that when you turn that faucet on, I've got fresh drinking water coming out of the faucet. And that when I flush the toilet, the waste is going to be removed. That's a kind of an obvious thing.
It's kind of the real purpose of cities.
That's right. Because you want those municipal utilities. And so we have a huge thing coming down the line.
That's why people move into town, right?
Right. And there's also reasons people move out of town, right? And would rather have a septic and a well.
Well, now that's changed over the last 100 years. Right.
But the right reason we do move into the confines, we want the comforts. We want to know that we have regular garbage collection, that we have fresh water. Our electric grid isn't going to go down. Those are things we come to expect as taxpayers, and those are the real big issues. Safety and security, our first responders. We want to know when we pick up the phone and dial 911 that the fire department, police department, and ambulance is going to be there in a timely fashion to take care of what our need is. And so those are really two big issues that we face, and they are big issues for this city. We know the condition of our wastewater system, and the fact that that's going to have to be replaced, and that's a huge dollar item that the city's going to be looking at. And so, this next council is going to be dealing with that. And there are new technologies out there. We're going to have to look at those and say, is it worth spending even more to get those technologies so that we're not even that much further behind the curve 5-10 years down the road? And so, those are things that this next council is going to have to address on the front end, because that's a large dollar item. I mean, I'm hearing figures anywhere from $800 million or $800
Yeah, a million.
Million, yeah, to $1 billion, and maybe over, depending on what is really needed. And so, we pride ourselves on having a low tax rate, but that can come back to bite you too, if you're not maintaining what you have. So a big part of my campaign is let's ensure that we maintain what we already have, which includes our water system, our park system, what we have in our first responders. Let's make sure those things are taken care of. And then we can look into the future as to what it is. But if we want economic growth, we're not going to have it if we don't have those things that are desirable for businesses and for families to move into an area, because they're just not going to move here if we don't have them.
I guess they could just move to Canyon and commute. Right?
They do have options, right?
Yeah.
With some of the small towns here. And those come with their own issues that they have to deal with. But I mean, you're correct. You could
Basically, you're helping out your
Right.
suburban areas.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, but our first responders, I think this council has done a great job in bringing up their salary base. It's been long overdue for them. We've been losing policemen, firemen down to Lubbock, up to Pantex, because they pay better and they have better overall
Benefits.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for them. And so, we have to address that issue if we want to keep them. The other issue we have, as I've spoken to the police and fire in their academies, is maintaining the recruits that they get in, those candidates that are in there to be trained. They'll get a good number now that the salaries are up, but it's the number that are actually graduating that you have to look at. And we're not adding those numbers that we would like to. And part of that is this younger generation, they understand the service. I'm going to be a police officer. I'm going to be a fireman. But they don't understand, I think, the commitment that it takes and the sacrifice. And that's part of what I'm trying to do with the Leadership Academy at the War Memorial, is teach those skills about the fact that when you do a public service, it's a service, but it's a huge sacrifice to you, to your family, and it's a commitment. If you're only going to do this for 2-3 years, is that somebody that we really need? We need somebody that's going to be committed to that profession. And I hope that by doing something like the Leadership Academy, we can get these young kids understanding those things, because those are some of the pillars that are part of that curriculum. And so I think that's going to be a good thing for what we'll see going into our as candidates into our first responding classes, as well as those that decide that they might want to go into the military and have a military career. So that's not something that the council can do anything about. That has to be done outside. But the first step was addressing that salary problem, and they've done a great job. When we look at that, every year, police and fire have to come back and renegotiate a contract. I worked for the federal government, and we never had to do anything like that, because every year there was a COLA built in. Mm-hmm. We don't do that with our first responders, and that's something that we're going to have to look at. But again, there's budgetary restraints that are put on that, and you have to look at that overall. But we've got to come up with a better model for those type of services that we come to expect as citizens.
Yeah, I guess the current council was able to get that done and reduce the budget.
They did. Budgets, government budgets are a different animal.
Yeah.
And I know when I was with the FBI, one of the one program that I went up to work on that I was in charge of, we had a $65 million a year budget. And I remember the first time sitting down with the people that helped put that budget together and watching them. And I said, so we just make up numbers?
Yeah. Where'd you come up with this?
Yeah. How I said, I could go in the bathroom, take a piece of toilet paper, write some numbers down, and come say, here's our budget. It was an interesting process to go through. And at first it didn't make sense. And what really didn't make sense is what they did is they started with the year before and they said, we automatically put a 5% bump on it.
Yeah.
And I said, well, inflation was only 2%. And so why are we doing 5%? Well, that's how it's always been done. And I really thought that was an odd thing. And then at the end of the year, if you had money left over, you either spent it or it went back. And it went to some other program.
It never went back.
But it never went back. Yeah, it went, and I said, that 36 trillion's out there somewhere.
Oh, yeah.
We just don't know where yet. So going through that process taught me a lot. Now, that project that I was ultimately in charge of, I didn't go up in charge of it. It took them 4 months to put me in that position. But I built the system was built on time and $5 million under budget. Now, that $5 million didn't come back to our program over the next couple of years. And so, I saved the government $5 million, but it got spent someplace else. Mm-hmm. So on the local level, one of the things I think that bothers a lot of people is a budget is proposed, it's discussed, it's passed, and there's a level of transparency that I think people really want to see. And even though you may follow all of the rules with open meetings and posting and everything else, I think they want more transparency on where their dollars are going. And I think that's what this council did. They sat down, they looked at it, and they said, okay, what are our priorities? Because that has to be the first thing. What are the priorities for this year? And you fund those priorities, then you look at the rest. And I think this council did a good job in prioritizing a budget, finding that money, because it was there. In that $500 million, it was there. And so it just takes people the time to sit down and care about those things. And remember, it's always in the back of your mind, and I think a lot of our politicians have forgotten this. This isn't your money. The taxpayers have given it to us to spend on the things that they need.
I would agree with you, except for one thing. They didn't give it to you.
That's true.
We took it. You took it.
And that brings up a whole new philosophical discussion on how we get that money. But you're right. It's if people were left to their volunteering, probably wouldn't have the money to run a city government.
Well, or you might have more.
You don't know, right? Because we tried the volunteer thing early on, and it worked. It did work. So government's gotten big, and there's an expectation of those dollars. And so that's, and that may be something that has to be looked at down the line.
That's why it gets bigger.
Yeah. How do we raise that money? When you look at the two biggest incomes for the city, it's first is sales tax, and the second is property tax. And so that makes up about 53% of what is brought in, right? So that tells you 47% has to come from elsewhere, and it does.
Well, and you have your water and sewer
right.
trash.
You have all of those things, which are taxes.
But to me, a city should be run by user fees of the people that are using the water, the sewer, the trash, and the other amenities. And that's how you fund government.
Right. And that kind of works for you utilities and those things, right? Garbage collection. Like at the War Memorial, I have two big dumpsters, and the city was charging almost $400 a month.
Yeah. So you privatized.
And I privatized and saved $300 a month.
Yeah. And
so there are options, but when we're in the city, you have to use that utility, right?
Commercial, you don't.
Right. Commercial, you can go up, but the neighborhoods.
Well, my thought is, why couldn't you sub out different routes to? You got a lot of different trash companies here, and they do a good job.
Absolutely. And
why do you need to maintain all those trucks, dumpsters, employees, benefits when you could sub it out to 8 or 10 different companies. You don't want one.
Each could have, that's right.
And you want them to compete, and you have one guy that oversees all that.
Yep. And that's an option. Not sure that any of these councils have looked at subcontracting out our waste management.
I've mentioned it for years, and they never hear back. Yeah. It's like parks. Like you could sub out the grounds of all the parks to different landscape companies, let them draw straws, pick one, compete, let the citizens vote on who does the best job, and then they get another one the next year, and they could get signage on the parks, and it would save the city a fortune on mower blade, just grinding wheels to sharpen the mower blades.
And actually, it's funny you mentioned that, because I was just talking to a tree landscaper. Mm-hmm. He came out and did my trees out at the War Memorial. We got talking, same thing. And I said, why are our parks looking this way? And he says, because there's never been a maintenance program in our parks.
There's no incentive.
Right. And so, and he said, the thing to do is hire us. Mm-hmm. Don't have that Parks and Recreation taking care of it. Hire us too. Same thing you just said. Yep. And it got me thinking, what are the other things that we could operate that way?
But you could let them compete, and it'd be a fun community event, and you could have a vote of who did the best job, and they get a reward of some sort, and you pay them a fair amount to do it, but they also get signage, which gives them an incentive to do a really good job.
Because then they're getting known and they're picking up.
You could have a different company do the trees, and you could have you could do plumbing companies for the restrooms.
Yeah. So I'll look at that on a negative first, using the federal government as the example, because they contract out a heck of a lot of things.
Yeah. And
it's so costly for them because nobody's doing the oversight.
That's the problem.
Right. So
it's too big.
If you do that, and you can do it probably better in a city because it's smaller and you have the oversight. So that's why I wanted to start there and say the reason why that doesn't work necessarily. And I know there's going to be a lot of people that are listening that work on those government contracts and say, don't take it away from us. But when I had my diplomatic tour, and the people that I would deal with from the United States were on contract, and finding out what they made, and I was thinking, well, why are they double the salary? And I'm here for the federal government, and they didn't have the benefits, so I get the benefit package, but it still didn't add up to the salary.
But you could put the money in the bank on interest over time and beat the benefits.
Right. Plus, since they took those assignments, same assignments I had, and as long as they were there, I think it was for 6 months, they didn't pay tax. I didn't have that benefit. I still had to pay tax on the dollars I was earning. So by not doing government oversight and saying, you're asking for a contract that is way out of whack with everything. But that's on the federal level. So locally, you can actually have a better oversight. And so that's something that, as I've like I said, just talking with this tree guy and seeing that, it's funny that you bring that up. That is that an option that we look at for those type of things that could save the city money on this end, where we really need to spend it for something else that is necessary for the city.
But to me, every government entity, they should start with a zero-based budget. They should all be zeros. Then they should bring the department heads in and explain to them what they need and how much money every year. Right. You don't start with what you did before. Right. That, to me, is the flaw in the system.
Well, that's it. So as it was explained to me once down in Austin on education, and I asked the question, if you're our representatives, if you had to list what our priorities are, what would they be? And the group, the committee that I was talking with, education was number one. Public safety, roads and bridges. Those were the top three. And I said, well, if education is always number one, why are we always having special sessions for education to figure out how we're going to fund it? Why wouldn't you do that first? And I was actually told that's the difference between a business model and a government model, right? So government doesn't operate that way. Should it? I think we're seeing that if we operate it more like a business, because it is, we're bringing money in that isn't ours, and we've got to operate a business, a $500 million a year business.
Well, it's an excuse because they don't have the profit motive. So to me, it should be a lot easier. You don't have to make a profit, but you should have but it's the opposite. It's about how much little you can spend,
right,
rather than how much you can make.
Right. So you should look at the programs, and I think this council did a good job. 250 programs that the city of Amarillo funds. The taxpayers fund.
That's about 229, and it could get rid of. I can tell you that right now.
I mean, and that should be the question at the beginning of the year. Are there programs that we're funding that either need to be cut back or not funded at all? Yeah. That should be really the first question. Like you say, that zero. Even before you do that, let's look and is this something that we really should be funding? Is this something that the city needs, that they're asking for? Or is it a small group of people that's asking for these funds? And we're doing it because for whatever reason. So I think that's an important thing. And I appreciate your kind of laying it out that way, using that zero base. It kind of makes sense to do it that way, because even with tax dollars coming in, you're not necessarily guaranteed what that tax amount is.
You have no idea what it's going to be.
No. When you look at the amount of dollars that are uncollected in the counties, so you don't know.
I just did a tour of the Potter County tax office, and he gave me a form. He goes, look at this. 20% of all real estate have not paid their taxes. 76% of businesses have not paid their property tax. That tells me people don't have the money.
Right. Yeah, because not everybody.
They don't want to pay the penalty.
Nobody's breaking the law.
No.
Maybe some of them, but
no,
the
they just don't have the money.
They just don't have the money. And so what do? And I mean, that's why you have that position, right? They've got to make the decisions. How do we go after this on the civil end? Is there something criminal? No, we're in the economy right now, is teetering. You
can only tax people so much. Yep. People only have so much money. They can't. Their only other option is to start robbing a toot and totem. Right?
That's right. You don't rob a bank. They don't keep any cash.
No, that's a federal offense.
And it's a federal offense, but they don't keep that much cash anymore.
Really?
Right? But
I don't know that they have any.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. They build a lot of buildings.
That's why they don't have any.
Yeah, it's people are hurting. And your upper classes aren't going to feel it as much. They feel it, but not as much. And so, but what's the majority of our city? Right? Where is it economically? What is when you look at what the average salary is in Amarillo, it's not that high.
Yeah, what is it, like 55, 60?
Yeah, I was going to say 50,000. Yeah, that's gross.
Both people?
And that's most likely.
Household.
Right.
Right.
I always like to joke, my wife and I work 2 jobs.
Like, I'm paying all my people too much then.
Right. So, you really look at it, and I think a city council member, that's something that you always have to keep in the back of your head. Like you said before, it's not your money, right? It's the citizens' money. We've been given the care of it. And how do we best use that's effective for everybody in town?
Yeah.
And,
it's not easy.
It isn't easy because, where something in the southeast of town may need certain things, well, you get to the northeast part of town, it's something else that they need. And where does that fit in that budget cycle that year? How do you fit it in? Is it an immediate need? Is it something that you can push out for 3 years, maybe 2 years, something you can push out further? Those are things that are really going to have to be looked at. But we also learned over the last 8-10 years, pushing things out isn't always the most cost-effective way either, because eventually you got to pay.
Yeah, you can hit the wall.
you got to have paved roads. And if you keep pushing that out, well, eventually you got to have a lot of paved roads.
Yeah.
Right?
Although I know a lot of towns in Texas that don't have paved roads.
True.
So
And
we think we have to have paved roads. And they're nice, but they're not as urgent as it may be a sewer plant.
right. No, sewer plant is, when you live in a city, sewer plant is probably the most urgent.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why I think that's going to be the biggest focus of this next council over the next 2 years. Because even if we figure out where the money is and how we're going to get it, it's still going to take 3 to 4 years to build. It's not something that, okay, here's the money, and in 6 months we've got a new plant.
Do you know how many million gallons a day go into that plant?
I have at this point, I don't.
I'm not sure. I think it's like 16 million gallons a day plant or something.
I mean, it's a lot.
Yeah, that's quite a bit, but I mean, you may be able to do some sedimentation ponds temporarily or something until you get there. At 85%, you have to make plans, right? That's where you're at.
That's right.
If somebody added a bunch of subdivisions or something flowing into it, it will increase it. But if they're not building new houses and businesses that are going to be pumping more flow into it, then basically you're okay.
That's correct. That's correct.
So the problem is you wouldn't be able to expand.
You can't expand
there.
Right. And we have to look at that too. You know, the mixed utility districts, as you look at those with those that live outside.
Oh, the mud.
Or the mud, right?
Yeah.
So as you look at that, they're using city services. Mm-hmm. They're outside. How do we bring them in to the city? I mean, they're using those and not paying any taxes on it. You know, is that something that we have to look at in how we expand the city? Because the city's growing, whether we call it the city of Amarillo.
It's just outside the line.
It's just outside the line.
Imaginary, invisible line.
I mean, I think about 1986 when I moved here. I lived, it's kind of funny, other than my time living down in Canyon, I have lived off Hillside every time I've been in Amarillo proper. But where I lived was just, it was Hillside and just east of Coulter. There was nothing out there. Nothing, right? After I got transferred and moved back, you know, what was the loop no longer was the loop. It was just another north-south roadway in Amarillo. And so the city has grown. In the 40 years that I've been here, it's gotten big. It's no longer that small town feel, and it's going to continue to grow. And we really are going to have to look at it as a council on how that growth happens, because there's an attractiveness of living out in the county, right?
No city tax.
No city tax, right? But as I like to tell people, look at your tax bill. School district, county, city, in that order. And so it's the school district that eats up at least 50%, sometimes higher, sometimes a little lower. But that's the big tax that everybody's paying. And, where
my grandfather said, King.
Other taxes, county and city, you're using those resources. But there's a point in your life where you don't use the school resources, right? You know, you and I are both grandparents, right?
I'm not.
Not yet?
Not yet.
Okay, well, I am. I'm a great-grandparent. Wow. And I have paid for my kids. My grandkids are now in there. And at some point in my life, I'll probably be paying for my great-grandkids. And maybe that's something that has to be looked at the state level. We can't do it in the city to say, you know what, maybe when you reach a certain age, that school tax, not that it freezes, the rate freezes, it goes away. But that's a state issue. But, you know.
Well, actually, the state doesn't have anything to do with property taxes.
No, I realize that. But
the city can't. I believe the city has the power. If they wanted to, they wouldn't have to charge property tax.
The city, it wouldn't. As far
or
as
the county.
Right. The school does.
They could choose not to as well.
They wouldn't get enough funding from the.
Well,
right.
Yeah, but I think there's a better way.
Yeah.
I think you should do away with property tax. put a sales tax on real estate like everything else. When you buy it, you pay the tax because it's fair, because you established the price. You don't have an unelected bureaucrat assessing value.
Right.
Yeah, it's going to be a hit when you buy it, but you own it.
Right. So
and then that money goes to the comptroller. The legislature then appropriates the money per student, and based on previous year's enrollment, that's how much money they get. You solve all these problems in one fell swoop.
And you and I kind of agree on some of those things. I agree with that at the price is established at the sale of the home.
That's right.
That's right. Even with the way we do it now with the appraisal district, there shouldn't be an appraisal every year. You establish the price of that home at the sale. So if anything, you pay the tax on that price until you move.
And that was Proposition 13 in California back in the 70s or 80s.
Yep.
And that's why property values are so much more valuable in California than Texas, is because they have low property tax.
Yeah.
The tax is an expense which kills your value.
Yeah. And I mean, that makes sense. And we also know statistically the average person moves between 5 and 7 years, right? And if you had to do an appraisal, if they hadn't sold their house, they lived it in 10 years, okay, maybe you do a reappraisal after 10 years. Maybe not. But I'm just saying there's people who are moving anyway. So
I think it's a moral issue. It's an immoral tax.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be me, but if you have $1 million sitting over in a bank, drawing interest, you're not, state doesn't come and tax you as a wealth tax on that.
That's exactly.
But if you say, I'm going to build a building, I'm going to, at the War Memorial, and I'm going to start a school to do whatever, educate kids, a private venture, and you employ, and to hire employees, if you build a building for the $1 million, the appraisal district's going to come in and charge you a wealth tax every year.
Yep.
At roughly 2.5%, between 2.5% and 3%, and that then a bureaucrat's going to come in and say, well, I think it's worth $3 million. You're going to pay 3% on that. In 10 years, 15 years, you're going to pay that $1 million again. Is that because you invested in Texas? You're penalized.
You're penalized. Yeah.
You don't need to do it. And I think you would see so much growth and so much activity, and the sales tax revenue would go through the roof if you would just simply get rid of property taxes, charge a sales tax on real estate. Everything should be treated the same.
So just do the sales tax on real estate is what you're saying.
Yeah, well, just like when you buy a car or anything else.
So, I'm going to give you an example. When I lived in West Virginia, my property tax, I had the same size acre in West Virginia that I had outside of Canyon, same size house. And my property tax was $200. And it was great, writing that $200 check. But when I say that West Virginia taxed everything, they taxed everything, right? So my cars, every year, you didn't just pay the tax when you purchased the car. Every year, they would send you the bill based on the Kelley Blue Book. This is what you're.
Yeah, that's wrong. That's what they're doing to real estate.
And when I say everything, even my dogs were taxed. You paid a tax per dog.
I think that's a really good idea in the city of Amarillo.
Yeah, it might solve some of the dog problem.
They should have a pet tax.
You want to have the dog? Yeah.
Because they cause so much problems.
Yep. It does. And that's something that has to be looked at. You know, we kind of overlook animal control sometimes. I actually try to
me, it's
them.
a choice whether or not you have a dog.
That's right. Or a cat.
My point is, the way I'm looking at it is, it's a choice. Yeah. Everything should be a choice. And you choose to pay the $1 million for the building, or you choose to pay the $1 million for the house. And you have a choice to buy a $2 million house, a $1 million house or property, or a $50,000.
That's right.
And you should pay the tax, and it's fair. Right. And you're done.
Right. Now,
and here's the real reason I think it's a good idea. It's not about the money. It's psychological. If you own your property and nobody can take it from you, Number one, you're going to take care of it. And number two, you're going to fight for your community.
That's a good point. I mean, it also leads to some stability in the community too.
Absolutely. I can't see anything wrong with it. Politicians say, well, what if we don't bring in as much money? I'm like,
you just don't spend
it's
it.
not your freaking money. And that's a good thing. And that's how you shrink government.
So here's an issue though, Dan, with government. We could switch to that, but do you trust government to stay there?
I trust the people.
Right.
The problem, I don't think, is government. I think we have it backwards. The problem really isn't government. The problem is business entwined with government. Mm-hmm. So they take over government. And that's what's happened with our country.
Yeah. You may be right. I haven't thought of it in that context.
I've always said the best, if we want to solve a lot of problems, we need a constitutional amendment, separation of business and government.
I've always said follows that is you want an answer for something, it's going to be found in the private sector.
Yeah.
It's not going to be in the public sector. The government doesn't discover things, and probably the two programs that the government being entwined, where it actually worked was the railroad and the space at the beginnings, not as it carried it on, and the monies that we give to Amtrak and everything to bail them out and everything, but on that initial end to get investors involved and granting the land rights to run that railroad and to actually get men into space. I think those are two programs when we look at and say they were run efficiently initially. Not saying where they are today. Right. At some point, government needed to back out because private industry is going to find the solution.
Exactly.
You look at what we've done with EVs, right? And the government spent how many billions of dollars putting in 3 charging stations, or however, right?
It's crazy. But that's
when cars got on the road and were running on gasoline, the federal government didn't give money for people to build gas stations. Right. That was a private thing. And in order to compete, they had to offer services. They did mechanics work. They came out, they pumped your gas, they cleaned your windows, and they checked your oil for you, right? That wasn't government requiring it. And so I think you and I
That's
agree
capitalism.
That's right.
But the problem is, and this all happened around the turn of the early 1900s. You had the big Marxist movement. You had the Bolsheviks take over Russia. They basically took over the United States. We just didn't call them that. We called them Democrats, right? But you've got a debt-based system. It skews everything. Yep. And people have to borrow more and more money. Mm-hmm. And that's where the city's in. And I'm like, what? It actually occurred to me this morning. What is the real problem? So the city has to borrow more money. They're going to have to borrow money to build a sewer plant because they can't save money. And if people don't have any money, 20% of the people in Amarillo are behind on their property taxes and 76% of the business. Why? Why does everything go up? Right. They call it inflation. It's not inflation. It's theft, right? Because we have a debt-based monetary system. All your money in your pocket, your salary, everything you get paid has to be lent into existence. That's the problem.
That's exactly right. Now, if you can, and you remember the 60s and the 70s, things weren't expensive.
Well, everybody thought they were. I remember when gas went to 29 cents, and my dad was so mad. I'm filling up a tractor, and I wasn't paying attention. And a little bit of fuel splashed out to get the hood wet, and I remember getting chewed out for wasting. I'm like, it's 25 cents a gallon, but that was a lot of money, it seemed. Yeah. And I remember when it went to 29 cents, people just went nuts.
But back at that time, it wasn't until the late 70s that we started to see the income divide really happened. Resources were cheap, labor was cheap, up until about the mid to later 70s. And then all of a sudden, labor took off. The cost of labor went up. And with that, we saw other increases, and things got more expensive. And that's when you really saw that debt economy come in.
Well, I think you had, in the 70s, everybody's really expanding, building houses, creating families, middle class was booming, banks were lending, right? Inflation was going up because of all the lending.
The lending,
that's
what I'm saying, yeah, that debt.
But that was due to increased demand, right?
That's right.
So then Paul Volcker comes in and he puts the brakes on, raises rates to 20-some%, shuts everything down. Reagan comes in, reduces regulation, economy, and reduces taxes, which are a burden. Economy takes off, right? And everything rocked along fairly well for about 20 years. And then they started more taxes and regulations again, and started strangling. But businesses, and then we have the businesses are rocking along, but then during that period we have this globalization, so everything starts offshoring, right? So they can make it cheaper in China. So we can produce the grain, ship it to China. They can make the product and ship it back here cheaper than we can because our labor costs are too high. Right. Well, then, they have the virus, and that kind of woke the world up, and everything kind of stopped. They just kind of stopped the world for a brief period of time. And so then they print all this money because nobody's borrowing. Right. That's exactly so right. They have to print the money, because if they don't, nobody has any money.
They don't have any money.
Because they've shut down the world. But now we have inflation for the opposite reason. It's not because we're expanding. It's because there's no supply. There's no product. That's right. Because nobody's making anything. And especially in the United States. We're not making anything. There's demand for it. So it's supply. And it's the opposite of what it was in the 70s. Right. But the academics can't see it, so they're using the same policies that they did in the 70s to fix this problem, which creates the opposite. So you raise interest rates, you create a massive problem.
Huge, because nobody has any money to begin with.
You can't borrow.
Right. So I really think that this is probably the end of globalization. We're seeing the front end of this thing. And there's only going to be a certain number of countries that survive outside of globalization. Luckily, the United States is set up well enough to do that. But
yeah, we can produce everything that we need.
And it's nice that we brought China into the modern world back in the 70s with Nixon's trip out there and having relations with them. It's great. But the Monroe Doctrine was probably one of the best things ever written.
Yep.
Take care of our hemisphere.
Yep.
And if we had created what we created in China, in Central America, South America, there'd be no issues.
That's right.
And I think we're going to see the end of globalization, and we're going to see that we're going to start. It's going to be costly on the front end. I think Trump said that the other night. Temporarily we're going to see some increases. Because this is going to be hard, but we're going into a new era, and so we have to look at that and what are we going to develop within the United States and our neighboring countries. And it really is sad that we didn't develop Central America. Mm-hmm. I know when I was with the FBI, we talk about illegal immigration. We did a fingerprint exchange with Guatemala and El Salvador. 40% of their citizens that came into the United States had criminal backgrounds. 40%. And we opened borders, knowing that when they're coming, and the reason they had that is their countries couldn't provide because we didn't do anything to help them out with industry. The money we sent them, all we did was send them money. And because of the corruption in those countries, The money didn't get to where it needed to be.
That's the problem.
And it is. Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, when I was in Chile, to be a police officer there, you had to pay for everything yourself. If they got accepted to go to the academy, you had to pay for academy training. You had to pay for your uniforms, your car, right? And they said, the reason we do this, we don't want our police to be corrupt. And so we know that if they've got the ability to pay, they're coming from a family with substance, or they're working really hard to have the money.
Less incentive to steal.
On the other hand, my time in Indonesia, they couldn't pay their police officers enough, so every police officer would have their own corner for traffic. They didn't have to worry about traffic lights. And one of the funny stories, we were going up to the academy where I was doing some instruction with their police, and we got in the left lane to make the left turn, and I noticed the driver, who was a police officer, he put his hand out, and the officer came over, and he gave him a tip. I said, what was that? And he explained to me, he said, our officers don't make enough. So they get their corner. And the only way you get to make a turn is if you pay them. And I said, that's got to be the most ridiculous thing I ever heard. And he kind of laughed. He said, you want to drive tomorrow? So, yeah. So I did. And I got in that left lane to make the turn, and I didn't have the tip. And I sat, and I sat, and I sat. And then finally he waved his hand, and the guy let us through. And I was like, that is crazy. But it adds to, I mean, that's a low-level corruption. But the fact that they couldn't pay their law enforcement enough in a salary that they had to augment their salaries by controlling traffic that way. So you see that in the countries, and we don't want to see that. But corruption is the big thing when you get into a lot of those countries. And I remember when I was teaching, I said, don't think that the United States doesn't have corruption.
Oh, yeah.
We do. I said, we just package
Everywhere.
it. We package it differently.
Yeah.
And I said, so there are two areas in the United States that we really have a hard time with corruption. And that's in our judicial system and on our law enforcement. And when it's discovered, we act quickly. But every other level in our society, we don't care about. But those two, and which is important, it's those two. But it should be kind of all over. But we allow corruption. And that's what I tried to get across to them is don't think that we're not. And us paying money to countries and not expect, one, the country should be expecting something from it. What factories are you building? What medical things are we going to have here? Instead, the people that are in control, in power, they're taking the money.
Yeah.
And so
some of it's coming back to the people that appropriated it.
That's right. Exactly.
It's pretty obvious.
Yeah. I think it's becoming more and more obvious as the days go on.
But that's what's killed all republics.
Yep.
In history. It's corruption.
Yep. That's
the flaw in a Republican form of government.
Yep.
Because people become complacent. They turn the other cheek, the other way, and go about their lives thinking that they've got people in office that are going to do the right thing. And then they look up a few years later and there's all this corruption.
That's right.
That's why people have to start showing up at their council, commissioners, school board meetings. And if they'll just be there, it'll start to go away.
That's right. Because they'll be seen in public.
That's right.
The other is people have to start getting out and voting.
Yes.
So we have become complacent. You said the word.
We've had it too easy.
Our generation, we've allowed this political class to develop and seed itself.
Yeah.
And they know it. They have the power and the control. And we've got to figure out a way to break that.
It's very simple.
And it is simple. If people would go out and vote and just vote out incumbents.
Vote and show up at your community at the local level. That's all you have to do. All problems are at the local level. That's right. Then everything else takes care of itself.
Yep. Because, on our daily lives, the state government and the federal government have a little effect on us, but not that much in our daily lives.
Right.
Locally, that's where you're affected. every single day. No matter what you're doing, you're affected by what goes on locally in government and how our departments are run, what they do, what they don't do.
And they're your neighbors.
And your neighbors.
And they are going to help you.
Yep. So
But you got to communicate with them.
That's right. So, you look at it and someone said, you're running for city council. They said, so that's what, that's how you piss off 50% of your friends and the other 50% become your enemies. And so, because they are your neighbors.
But I don't agree. I think that's wrong. I think that people think that. Yeah. But everybody wants a good community. We want good schools and safety, and we all want the same things, and good sewer plants and water facilities. And we all want what's best for the community. What we don't want is corruption, and we don't want people that are benefiting from taxpayer money unnecessarily or improperly. That's and that brings us to the AEDC, right? So where do you stand on what's going on there?
I have looked at that, not really in depth. I'd like to claim I'm ignorant of it, because that would be the easy answer. I have listened to both sides independently. And when you listen independently, both sides make sense, right? But then the professional side steps in. And what usually that tells me is the answer is somewhere in the middle. And what that is, I don't know. I know people that were on the AEDC, and I think they're fine people. Mm-hmm. Good citizens. And so part of me says, I can't believe that they would do something illegal. I know fine people on the other side that brought this to the attention of the community. And I say, I know they're not making it up. Documents are documents, right? They kind of speak for themselves. I don't think, my personal feeling is I don't think anybody did anything illegal. I don't think that people were transparent with what was going on with the AEDC and whether it was the businesses that they were trying to bring into town, how that was happening. And so I think that has to be looked at very closely. One, so it doesn't happen again, because the AEDC is essential if we want economic development. Because as a council, we can't go out and do it.
Well, but the community, most of the people that have businesses here didn't get a grant from AEDC, and they grew their business from nothing. Right. And we operated 100 years without it. Yep. Why all of a sudden do we have to basically pay a bribe to companies to come to our city?
That's a good question. And
I know the answer.
I wouldn't think of it. I don't think of it as a bribe.
I know, but it's an incentive.
Incentive, right? Okay, so that may be.
But isn't that the same thing?
Right. So yeah. So we can play with the semantics, right? Right. But you are paying. You're paying them something, whether it's cash, something in the future, land, to get them here. But
it wasn't fair to the people that created their business that are here, that are paying the taxes, the sales tax to bring them in. To me, I have a problem with that personally.
With that concept.
I think we need to look at it, and the good thing about all this is it's brought our attention to it.
That's exactly right.
And maybe a discussion should be had. I don't think there's anybody, probably but me, that thinks you should maybe get rid of it.
Oh no, you're not the only one that's voiced that, right? Good. And it's so that's a question that this next council is going to have to answer. Is it something that is necessary for our community to bring business here, or can we sell our community on itself? Right.
Well, I'm just hearing all this money we need for the sewer plant. I'm like, okay, it brings in $25 million a year. We got $85 million in ADC. Right. Why, if that money over the past 30 years, at $20 million a year times 30 on interest over that period of time, we could have built both sewer plants and had money left over. And if you build the infrastructure that could make Amarillo grow, isn't that more important
Right.
than paying a business to bring jobs in, right?
And
because you can pay all the money to Amazon or whoever that didn't even ask for the money.
Right.
But if you don't have the infrastructure, they're not coming.
They're not coming. And so you hit on a good point, as far as that discussion. But if that discussion is going to be had, it has to be transparent.
Yeah.
Really, like you said, people need to show up to those meetings and voice their business owners to say,
Well,
wait a second. You look at Amazon, right? Great having them here. Mm-hmm. But a question that needs to be asked is, so we got them in here, got whatever number of employees they have, but why did they handle our community different than they have other communities around the country? Because in the other communities around the country, when they came in, they furnished a fire department station, the trucks, they paid for the personnel, right? They didn't do that in Amarillo.
Maybe they weren't asked.
Well, right. So then you got to ask, why wasn't the homework done to say these are things that we're going to need?
Exactly.
Right. So those are the questions that need to be asked. Mm-hmm. And then if you come up with the answer, like, you know what, maybe we don't need the AEDC. That might be the resolved answer, and we're going to do this a different way. But until we have that discussion,
I just believe that as we are well located, we have great infrastructure. Really, yeah, we may need a sewer plant. I don't know. I need to go look at this thing. I got to see things. We have the air base.
right.
You can land any plane. You can land a space shuttle here.
Yep.
And it's just sitting there.
So,
and that's a tremendous investment that's just sitting there.
And so how do we sell that? Right. And I think that's
when you let people know. We have the Paladero Canyon. You have that. We have the history of the big ranches and the cattle industry. You have the railroad history. And nobody at the city seems to care. It's never been marketed. Instead, they want to market baseball. I mean, I can't get my mind around this.
We have a group that, now at least we got that group that's marketing Route 66.
Yeah,
right?
Route 66.
That's a historic
Yeah.
roadway. That gets people's attention. And then you build off that.
You got this historic Herring Hotel that could be a huge draw.
Well, look at the Barfield. Mm-hmm. They renovated that building, and people come in. Use it.
And was that city money did that? I don't think so.
I think that was private.
My point is, a private business, if you leave them alone, they will do it. But they don't want to come in to where they're picking winners and losers.
So it gets to another issue, too, is regulation. What are the regulations that we're imposing on businesses that prevent them from expanding, coming in and building something new? Yeah. And those have to be looked at.
Yeah.
We tend to, government feels it needs to do something all the time.
Yeah, sometimes the best thing to do
is nothing.
Nothing.
Right?
That's right.
So that's what you're going to get from me. I'm not a knee-jerk reaction guy. Yeah. And a lot of people will say, like my kids, I'll say a project I want to do, and 6 months later they're saying, "Are you ever going to do that?" I said, "Well, I'm really thinking it through, how I want to do it and what I want it to look like, but it'll get done, and eventually it does." But that's the type of person I am. I like to look at those things. I like to talk to people, because I'm not a builder. Never was. I build my own stuff, right? But if we're going to be doing something with contractors, I want to have the time and the ability to go out and speak to people who know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
So if we do this, how does this affect this? Right? Because I need to know that before I can make a right decision. And so I think that's an important thing for anybody that gets elected to the council, that they're willing to go out and talk to the people who know something.
Well, I think in an ideal world, maybe the city needs to sit down and just say, here's the 100-year plan. Right. Because if you grow everything properly and you do everything in the right way, everybody's costs should come down, right? And everybody benefits. Yep. That's the ideal. And
I think the city, the last few councils have tried to do that with their 2045 plan, showing how the city's going to expand and how we're going to work on the neighborhoods so that we have the right amount of commercial property and businesses around and the right housing. Remember, right now, if we wanted to bring a business in here, we don't have the housing because not everybody wants a single family house. And
yeah, but the market will solve that problem.
it will, but you. I mean,
as long as you have water and sewer.
right. You got to have that, but you also have to have a plan how that's going to be. Right?
Yeah, you have to have the infrastructure laid out so that the market will pick up on it.
Right.
Right.
Well, because for every 1,000 families you move in, it affects all of your businesses, as far as schools, right? How many schools are we going to need to take care of these kids?
Yeah, there's a.
So you
I
have to
think
have
we
that
have to
plan.
look at everything, but because I think the way we do a lot of things probably may not work in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Education's changing dramatically.
Yes.
Like
Yep.
my daughter's in all online, Stanford online high school.
That's right.
So
Yep. And there are kids that are
she
well
does,
geared.
I pay a ton of property taxes. I think a lot. People would be amazed, but I don't ever use it. But you go into these schools and there's so much administration now and counselors and stuff that when you and I went to school, we had one principal and he had a secretary and there's 600 kids in the school,
Right.
right? And that was it.
Remember the counseling session? You two have a problem. Take it outside.
Right.
Right. That was the counseling.
That's it. No problems, really.
Not really.
And I remember when they got a vice principal, and it was a community outrage of waste of money.
Waste of money. Yeah. And now we have 2 or 3 vice principals. We have district coordinators and everything else.
So it's because the nature of government is to grow, and it will grow until people say no.
Well, a good example of that is the FBI. The only director of the FBI that was an agent was Louis Freeh. And when he was named director, the first thing he did was look at administration in Washington, D.C. And he told those guys, find a job back out in the field, or I'll find one for you. Because it had the administrative thing. And that's what's happened with a lot of the FBI is there are so many administrators, and they stick their noses in things that they would have never years before.
It's because they're bored.
They have nothing else to do, and they're given a job, a title. And so that has to happen again in government. Yeah. The flush out of people. I know a lot of people don't like it because there's going to be family members that lose jobs and everything. But on the administrative end, in every bureaucracy, whether it's state, federal, or local, things tend to grow. Yeah. So you have to. That's why you go back to that zero base at the beginning of the year and looking at the programs and asking, why do we have these people here in these positions when we used to do it with 3 or 4? Okay, the city is doubled in size. Okay, so you should really need 8. Why do we have 16? Right? Those questions have to be asked. Those are hard questions.
Well, people think they're going to be laid off, but that's actually going to be good for them.
Yep.
Because if Trump's allowed to implement his plan, they will be making 2 or 3 times the money in a very short period of time in the private sector.
That's right. I have.
They will thank him 10 years from now.
I've reinvented myself twice now since I retired, in areas that I never thought I would be. I like to teach when I did the training in law enforcement and everything, and so. But it's difficult to be a teacher. There's a lot of things that go into that.
Regulation too,
and
right?
There's a lot of regulation. Not so much in the private school, but I remember, when I put in for the job of athletic director, I was never an athletic director. I didn't know. I had a concept of what you were going to do, but you didn't know the job. But it didn't take long to figure out what I needed to do and how to get everything moving. And the same with going over to the War Memorial. I had never run a nonprofit, never had been a museum curator.
That's why you're good.
But you got to do that. You got to be able to recreate yourself. And this city council. Okay, I was on the school board. similar type thing. Not as much, because there the superintendent really does run stuff.
But he shouldn't.
That's a
The
topic for
school
another
board
day.
is the same position as the city council.
It really is. And
They're supposed to oversee the city manager,
the city.
hire and fire.
That's right. Yep. And if you get a good city manager, God bless you.
Yep,
Right? Because that's your number one job.
that's right.
The second job is the tax rate, because that affects every citizen, what they're going to be paying on their property, right? And then the third is overseeing that budget. Those are the three main jobs. Mm-hmm. Probably the fourth then is being a good listener, because you have to listen to the citizens on what they're telling you their needs are, right? And if you did those four things and you did them well,
Carry a notebook.
well, I found out getting older, I used to be able to remember everything. I've got to write things down, and I always forget that I have the phone that I can
I know.
take
I
that
still
out.
can't do it. I still have to use them.
Yep. I used to carry those all the time, and I got to get used to it because I forget. My wife kind of laughs. She says, we told you that 10 minutes ago. Yeah, you probably did, but I probably didn't write it down either. So, but those are the main things that people have to look for in a council member. There's not much more.
It's pretty simple.
Like I say to people, it's not rocket science. Right. It's even like doing a campaign. The money that we are spending on campaigns is ridiculous. $100,000, $140,000, $160,000.
Yeah, that's crazy.
It's ridiculous. And so I'm part of my campaign, and I sure hope I win to prove my case. I think
You don't need the money.
I think of my friends pretty highly, and the citizens of Amarillo I respect. To ask them for $100,000 to be on the city council, and so I am trying to keep this at as low cost as I can. One, to prove a point, but also I'm a cheap person.
Well,
I want to see a value.
You're frugal.
Right. I want to see the value for. That's why I was able to do that project, $5 million under budget, because I looked at everything, and asked why does it cost that?
Exactly.
But these local elections are getting out of hand with the dollars spent, and to this point, I haven't raised a dollar for my campaign. We're a month into this, and I haven't raised a dollar. I've paid for everything out of my back pocket. And I'm not a wealthy man.
But I think that's how it should be. You're doing it the right way, I think. And that's why I'm doing this, so I can level the playing field. Anybody that's running, we'll interview them. I'll get it out to the voters. We'll stick it on a couple of websites. We'll send a link to everybody, and anybody interested can get to know all the people that are running,
and
they'll make the right decision.
That's right.
You don't need money.
No.
Really.
No. And if you think of you're going to run for city council or any local position, people should at least know who you are. This platform gives the voters at least that opportunity.
It's up to the voter.
Right.
I'll send it to them. I got 68,000 people I'm going to send it to.
Yep.
So
and
hopefully 10,000 will vote.
And that's the other thing.
If they don't vote, they're just giving their vote to somebody else.
That's right. That's right.
So,
and I appreciate you for offering this platform. It's fantastic. You're always a gentleman and polite, and I know you don't have to be. But it's a great platform.
I don't want to get cuffed by an FBI agent.
Oh, geez, I forgot my handcuffs. No.
But that's why I created this platform, We the People Town Square. It's a private network where we've got educational stuff on there to where they can learn from everything from the Constitution to the two-party system and how everything works and who's running for office and their video. All of it's going to be on there, and there's going to be a lot more coming that we're building out that's going to be really good. So if, in fact, everybody could be on that platform and nobody would have to spend a penny to run for office.
Yeah, And you know,
The key is to get the voters on it
that's right.
is always the challenge.
Yep.
But if they would get on there, nobody would have to spend a penny.
Yeah. No, it's
can be done.
Yeah. And I agree with you. I've said over the last few years, you know, the technology we have, right, and our social media makes it possible to do it. Maybe not for nothing, but pretty close to not having to spend much money.
Very inexpensive. But I had a call from he's a Navy SEAL in New Jersey this morning, and he wants to run for Congress. And actually, he wants me to interview him tomorrow, but he wants me to give him a plan on how to win. Uh-huh. And I said, "Here's how it works," because he's like, "Well, I gotta raise money." I said, "Really, you won't have to worry about that, because here's what's going to happen. You're going to have all these consultants swarm you, and they're all going to say they can run your campaign, and you don't have to do anything, right? And they're going to bring in the PACs and the super PACs, and you're not going to have to do anything. But once you file, then they're going to come and say, well, you got to spend all your time raising money. That's all you're going to do. 8 hours a day, you're going to be on the phone begging for money, right? And they're going to probably get you elected, and they're going to spend millions of dollars in your campaign, and you're probably going to win. And then once you win, they're going to say, okay, you have to support this, this, and this. You go, well, whoa, that's not what I said I was about. They go, you don't have any choice. We got you elected, and if you don't do what we tell you, we're going to support somebody else next time, and you don't have any ability to raise money. We did it for you, and you don't have any ability to run a campaign because we did it for you. So good luck. Yeah. And what's a guy going to do? Most people, if you want to be part of the club, right, if you want to be part of the team, and you want to go to the parties, you want to get on Fox News, this is how it works. Yep. If you don't do it, you're out. That's exactly. And you're on your own. Yeah. That's how it works.
Absolutely.
So we got to get rid of the money out of politics. Right. And it's on both sides. It's not one side or the other. Republicans are probably worse. But you got to get rid of the PACs, super PACs. You got to get rid of the machines. And you got to get back to elections instead of selections till people know who won.
Right. Yeah, this is the money that is thrown around in all of the elections, whether it's local, state, or federal.
But they're buying influence, and it's stuff that people can't see. They're buying the media influence.
Yeah, it's crazy. It absolutely is crazy.
So you're paying money to people that are your enemy.
Right. That's right. And, so you look at how things have progressed as far as campaign financing. And probably the worst decision came from the Supreme Court when they said that a corporation is the equivalent to an individual.
Yeah, that's wrong.
It's just wrong. It
is legally, but not right. From an election standpoint, because they cannot vote, nor PACs.
Right. Only people that should be able to give to a campaign are people
that live in that district.
Right. Right. This money coming from all over the place into a district because they want to unseat who's ever there, or the Republican or Democrat, it's crazy. You should only be able to spend money in the state.
If you can't vote, you can't contribute or even work on the campaign.
So, yeah, but until that's challenged and the Supreme Court looks at that and says, you know what?
Well, Congress needs to pass a law and get rid of that McCain-Feingold thing. That screwed up everything. Yeah. And that happened about the time they brought in the machines, and I'm like, I see what they did.
Yeah, so, I mean, those are...
And use the party. You've got two political parties. I want two strong parties. That's where you get your discussion. That's where you get the community, the grassroots, show up, and that's where all this comes from. That should come up from, the roots, right. Not from the top down.
That's right. So I know when I started this campaign, and I was getting calls from Austin and Dallas about just like you said, running a campaign. And I looked at my wife and I said, Katie, this isn't rocket science. Why would you pay somebody to run a campaign? I said, if I pay somebody to run my campaign, I want him here.
Yeah.
So I can sit down and talk with them. Here's a strategy. Here's this. I don't want somebody in Austin. That doesn't do me any good. And I said, why would we pay for that anyway?
Right.
The whole idea is to get your name out there.
Knock on doors and talk to the people.
That's it.
That's really it.
So why do you need somebody to do that? If you're putting yourself out there, you should already have known, here's what I'm going to have to do. It is going to go to all of the the events that are going on in the city. I've got to show up to those. People have to see you there. That's the important thing. But having somebody run your campaign, I don't get it.
Yeah, if it's a statewide campaign, I can see it.
When I ran for Senate, even that one, we ran off our dining room table.
Yeah.
Now, I was late into the race because Kel didn't announce till late October, November that he wasn't running. So the other candidates already had 5 months on me. Mm-hmm. But I look at that campaign. I learned a lot because we had to do everything. And I was running between here and Midland and even further south every day. But I learned something. And I thought that my numbers were good for a first time running on that, plus being 5 months behind and about $750,000 behind. I thought we did very well. But I learned something, that this isn't right. You can do this on your own, and it should be done on your own. You have enough family and friends around that are going to help you for what you need.
Yep.
Right? But this local election and looking at the dollars, it's not right.
That means there's an agenda there somewhere. Somebody's got.
Yeah, and I don't have you know what my agenda is? That if I get elected, that I serve as best I can the people of Emerald, period. I don't have an inside agenda looking at any one particular thing, or I want to get this done or that. Because I learned something on the school board. The superintendent told me this. He said, "You're my boss." He said, "But until you get those 3 other votes on the board,
you have no effect."
You got no effect.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with the council.
Yeah.
You got 5 people sitting there. You have a great idea. You think it's a great idea. Unless you can convince 2 others, it's just an idea. And it's a good idea not to go in with an agenda.
So does the mayor vote?
Yes.
See, I think that's wrong. To me, you should have 3 or 5 council members. The mayor should only vote in a tie.
Well, and the reason for that is this: the mayor in our makeup, they have no veto power, right? So as a chief executive, they if the council voted a certain way, they can't come back and override that.
They have to do it.
Being that 5th member odd, they have to vote. So the charter would have to be looked at.
Well, that's easy to fix.
And then it has to go down to Austin, and
I don't know if it would or not.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Just tell Austin to bug off.
That's what you would like to say.
That's what I would do.
But so there are other ways of doing it. When they looked at expanding it out to 7.
I thought that was a bad thing.
Yeah, there's pros and cons, right? So the con is it's hard enough finding good people to run for these 5 positions. Mm-hmm. Now you extend it out to 2. That's the con. Mm-hmm. The pro to that is you can stagger so that you don't have the potential of changing your council every 2 years, right? So you really
then you would lose the ability to change the council every 2 years.
True.
So it can work both ways.
Right. So that's why I say there's pros and cons as you look at it, and you really.
Because 2 years ago they were able to turn over everything.
They turned everything over, and potentially this year, the potential is there for it to be a complete turnover too.
Yeah.
Right. which, again, there's good and bad. If it's a bad council, you want to be able to get rid of them, right? But if they're doing good things,
Yeah.
you want to keep them.
Generally, if the incumbents are doing a reasonably good job, most of the time people don't want to change.
Right. Yeah,
And that's why you want to run for an open seat. You're running for an open seat.
Yeah.
That's smart, right? Because it's hard to beat an incumbent.
It is, because they have a track record to go on. You can only say, here's what I would hope to do,
Right.
and then use professional and personal life experience that you've had that kind of show a track record in what you've done. It's much easier to run for an open seat than it is against an incumbent.
Yeah.
And so, but part of our problem with government is that complacency is, oh, you know what, they did a good job, so we're going to keep them.
Yeah.
Especially when you start seeing the 6-year terms with our senators. Federally, term limits, you hate saying it because we have term limits.
See, I 100% disagree with you have elections.
That's what I was just getting at. We do have term limits built in because you have
Yes.
elections. The problem is we have lazy voters, and it's always their guy, not mine.
Well, I think if we had hand-marked, self-authenticated, tangible ballots that can be verified, you'll see voting participation surge, real voters. Now, the count might not change,
Right.
but because we can verify it, you're going to have totally different people. 50% of the people in Washington, D.C. would not be there, and probably 20% at the state level.
Yeah.
I know exactly how they're doing it. It's so obvious, but you can't convince people.
Right.
They don't want to believe it. And a lot of that complacency comes down to people just don't think that their government could do this.
That. Yeah. Yep. But we do get complacent.
Yes.
Voters they have a job.
They
Voters
have
a
to-
job.
it's their responsibility.
And it's the most important job that we have as citizens.
Yes.
Being a representative, whatever level, isn't the important job. That's not the important job. The important job is a citizen.
That's right.
And the way you show that is you get out there and vote.
Be informed
Yep.
and vote.
Yep.
And we don't care how you vote, except Tim does. I don't. Right. He wants you to vote for him
Absolutely.
because he thinks he's the best candidate, right, for the job.
Well, I know I am.
So he knows he is. So what he's doing is trying to convince you.
Yeah.
So what else? Do you have anything else you'd like to tell the voters about why they should choose you, and what's your website, and how do people get a hold of
So
you?
the website is timreidamarillo.com. Facebook, we have a Facebook page too, and that's Tim S. Reid. And that'll be all of our election stuff that we're doing on there. I look at 66 years of life. What I came from to where I am now, and the life experiences, both personal and professional. Those things are what make me qualified. It's not any degrees I have or anything. I've lived a full life. I've done a lot of things with that life for the good of our community, for the good of this country. And I'm asking people to have that faith in me that was shown during my professional career, and to vote for me for City Council Place 1. And, I'm still a citizen. Even though I'm a council member, I'm still a citizen. And that's the greatest title that we all carry from this country. And
Yes.
that is something that we need to cherish and protect. And, on the city commission, I'm not a person that forgets where I came from.
Well, and you look at all the people that fought and died for that
Yep.
sovereignty of being a citizen with the right to vote. And look at the women who went through what they went through in the 1920s to get suffrage rights and the rights to the right to vote. It was so important. And then the women and the men don't show up.
Don't show up.
I mean, to me, that's what I can't really get my mind around.
I mean, the War Memorial we use as a polling place, and it's nice to see the numbers that come in, but it's not near the numbers that should be there. Being at the War
We're
Memorial,
going to change it.
For me, the last 2.5 years and dealing with as I do the research on our Panhandle veterans that we want to honor and remember there, and reading and listening to their stories, like you said, what they sacrificed on a personal level. And a lot of people like to go and say, they see a service member and say, thank you for your service. And I started thinking about that one day, and I said, you know what? Everybody serves in a capacity.
Yeah.
I said, it's not the service, it's the sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
It's the sacrifice, not only for that military person, but for their families. And we forget that as a nation, as citizens.
Mm-hmm.
We have 340 million people, and we have a standing military right now just at 3 million. Actually, it's a little bit under. So it's not even 1% of the population stands guard to ensure that our freedoms are intact. And we need to respect that and honor it, but understand it that we have an obligation as citizens, and in that obligation is to get out there and vote. Yeah, it's a right, but it's also an obligation.
It's a responsibility.
Absolutely.
In my opinion.
That's the difference between freedom and liberty.
That's right.
Liberty is freedom with a responsibility.
That's why I always use the word, I always say it's about liberty and responsibility.
Yeah, we don't say freedom and justice for all. We say liberty and justice for all. And that's a huge difference.
But it's a choice.
That's exactly right.
Everything is a choice. That's why we're here on earth, to make the right choice.
That's right.
So make the right choice when you go vote.
Yes.
But vote and make the choice. That's the action.
As long as people go out and vote, even the loser can't complain.
Right.
You put your name out there on the line, knowing that you could lose.
Well, I don't think there's really any losers in a campaign. You just have somebody that has to do the job and one that doesn't.
That's right.
So maybe they got some ideas out there that maybe nobody else thought of that changes the world.
That's right.
Right?
Yep.
So I really admire anybody that has the courage to stand up and run for public office. Yes. I mean, I think that's takes a lot of courage.
It does. I didn't think it did till I ran.
Yeah.
And this is I had three or four campaigns on the school board. 4, because I lost the first one, and then I was a glutton for punishment and went back. But I had 4, the Senate, and now this one. So this is my 6th race. It doesn't get easier because issues get more complex, but it's still a service. And I believe I have something to offer and to give to the community, and that's really the reason I'm running. We got to have a voice. And we want to make sure it's the right voice. So get out and vote. That's all I ask.
All right. Well, I appreciate you coming by.
Thanks for having me, Dan. It's always a pleasure.